My name is Sarah, and for nearly 2 years, my entire world existed inside a wall. When people hear that, they usually imagine a small hiding place where someone stayed for a few days. That was not my reality. I was 12 years old when I disappeared from the world, and by the time I emerged, I was no longer the same person. Before the war, my life was ordinary. I lived with my parents and my younger brother in a small Polish town. My father owned a bookstore, and my mother taught music lessons. I loved reading, playing outside with my friends, and dreaming about the future. Like most children, I believed my life would always remain the same. Then, the war arrived. At first, it seemed distant. Adults whispered about armies and invasions. Newspapers carried frightening headlines. But children have a way of believing that terrible things happen somewhere else. Soon, the terrible things arrived at our doorstep. New laws appeared almost overnight. Jewish families lost rights. Businesses were taken away. Friends stopped visiting. Teachers who once smiled at us suddenly looked the other way. Fear spread through the town faster than any disease. One morning, my father returned home with a look I had never seen before. He closed the curtains and locked the door. Then he sat us down and explained that our lives were in danger. I remember my mother's hands shaking as she held a cup of tea. That was the day I realized the adults were scared too. Months later, we were forced into a crowded ghetto. Hunger became a daily companion. Food was scarce. Disease spread quickly. Every week, more families disappeared. Nobody knew exactly where they were being taken. But everyone feared the answer. One evening, my parents received a visitor. He spoke quietly with my father for nearly an hour. After he left, my parents called me into the room. My mother was crying. My father looked exhausted. They explained that arrangements had been made to hide me outside the ghetto. At first, I thought my parents would come with me. They would not. The hiding place was only large enough for one person. I refused. I begged them to let me stay. I told them we would survive together. But deep down, I think they already knew what was coming. A few days later, before sunrise, I was smuggled out. I never saw my parents again. The journey took several hours. Eventually, I arrived at the home of a carpenter and his wife. They lived in a modest house on the edge of a small village. The couple seemed kind, but they were terrified. Anyone caught helping a Jewish child could be executed. They were risking everything. The carpenter led me to an upstairs bedroom. At first glance, it looked completely ordinary. Then he moved a wardrobe away from the wall. Behind it was a narrow wooden panel. He removed it. A hidden space appeared. That space would become my world. The compartment was built between two walls. It was barely large enough for me to sit comfortably. I could not stand upright. I could not stretch my legs completely. There was no window. The air felt heavy. The darkness felt endless. When the panel closed, I disappeared. No one would know I was there. For the first few days, I cried constantly. I missed my parents. I missed sunlight. I missed hearing children laugh. Most of all, I missed feeling human. The carpenter's wife brought me food whenever it was safe. Sometimes she would whisper stories through a small opening. Those brief conversations became the highlight of my day. Weeks turned into months. I developed routines to stay sane. I counted cracks in the wood. I recited books I remembered from memory. I created imaginary conversations with my family. Some days I pretended I was somewhere else entirely. Anything to escape the reality of that tiny space. The hardest part was the silence. Hours would pass without a single sound. Then suddenly I would hear voices downstairs. Every unfamiliar voice brought terror. Visitors were dangerous. Neighbors were dangerous. Everyone was dangerous. One afternoon, I heard loud knocking at the front door. Several men entered the house. I recognized the sound of military boots. Soldiers? My heart pounded so hard, I thought they would hear it through the walls. The soldiers searched the house. I could hear drawers opening, furniture being moved, doors slamming. At one point, footsteps entered the room directly above my hiding place. Then everything went quiet. For several seconds, there was only silence. I remember holding my breath until my chest hurt. Finally, the footsteps moved away. The soldiers left. Only then did I allow myself to breathe again. That night, the carpenter's wife told me they had searched nearly every room. If they had moved the wardrobe, I would have been discovered. I barely slept. The experience haunted me for weeks. As time passed, surviving became a strange mixture of fear and boredom. People often imagine danger as something dramatic. In reality, danger can be repetitive. Every day carried the possibility of discovery. Every day required patience. Every day felt exactly like the one before. Winter arrived. The hidden compartment became unbearably cold. I wrapped myself in blankets and still shivered through the nights. Then summer came. The space became hot and suffocating. Sweat soaked my clothes. The air barely moved, yet somehow I endured. I had no choice. 1 year passed, then another. I grew older inside that wall. The child who entered was slowly disappearing. In her place stood someone harder, quieter, and far more familiar with fear. Sometimes I wondered whether the war would ever end. Sometimes I wondered whether anyone even remembered I existed. Then one morning, everything changed. I heard excitement downstairs. Voices, laughter, crying. For a moment I feared the worst. Then I heard the carpenter call my name. The real name I had not heard spoken aloud in years. Sarah. His voice trembled. The war is over. At first I didn't believe him. The words felt unreal. The war is over. After so long hidden in darkness, hope seemed impossible. The panel opened. Light flooded the compartment. I covered my eyes. Even ordinary daylight felt overwhelming. Slowly I stepped out. My legs were weak. My body had forgotten what freedom felt like. I walked outside. For the first time in nearly 2 years, I stood beneath an open sky. I looked up and saw clouds drifting overhead. I remember crying. Not because I was sad, because I was free. The months that followed were difficult. I searched for my family. Like countless survivors, I hoped for a miracle. The miracle never came. My parents and my brother had not survived the war. The news shattered me. But it also gave me a responsibility. I had survived when so many had not. Their stories deserved to be remembered. Years later, people often ask me how I survived inside a wall for so long. The truth is simple. I survived because brave people chose compassion over fear. I survived because ordinary individuals risked everything to protect a child they barely knew. Most importantly, I survived because my parents made an impossible choice. They gave up the chance to stay together so that I might live. Even now, whenever I look at an ordinary wall, I remember that hidden space. I remember the darkness. I remember the fear. But I also remember the courage. Because inside that wall, surrounded by silence and uncertainty, hope somehow survived. And because hope survived, so did I.